Welcome to Highline Excel class number 3. Hey, if you want to download this workbook and follow along, click on my YouTube channel, then click on my college website link, and you can download this workbook. If you're enrolled in the class, just go to our class website. Hey, we got to talk about names, cell references, and assumption tables. A quick review of these somewhat difficult topics. The topic that most people have trouble with are cell references. So I'm going to do some quick review. All right, first thing is names. We have a data set here, car type and price. And we need to calculate the median, which means the price in the middle, sum all of the sales less than 20,000, count how many Toyotas, sum all the sales for Toyota, and then finally count all of the sales for Ford and Chevy. But I'd like to show you how to name a range, because for all of these, we're going to continually keep highlighting these ranges. And if I click here and use my control down arrow, I can see there's 102 rows here. Control up arrow. And so I don't want to keep highlighting those for all of these functions. So there's a nice, easy solution. We will name the range. Here, a basic example of naming is if you click in any cell and you come up to the name box and type whatever you want. I'm going to name this cell cute, and then enter. Now, if I'm over here and I want to go to cute quickly, I just click on that. So not only can you go to quick, but you can use that in formulas. So I want to highlight this table from A2 all the way down to B102. I'm going to highlight the top 2 cells, hold Control Shift and down arrow. I'm going to click in the name box, and I'm going to type data. And then hit enter. Now that is named data. I can go to cute, or I can go to data. Now there's a fast way for data that's set up like a database. Field name at the top, and then this whole column is car type. Field name at the top, and this whole column is price. I'm going to highlight this whole table, and there's a keyboard shortcut to highlight the whole table. It's Control asterisk. Asterisk is on the number pad. Control asterisk highlights the whole table. Now, how do you name? This is called name from selection. Excel knows that if it has a field name, it'll name this column car type. You could go to formulas, define names, this one, create from selection. But notice the keyboard shortcut, Control Shift F3. So there it is, create from selection. I'm going to use Control Shift F3. In either case, it comes up and it says, hey, do you want to use the left? No, we don't want to use the left. Our names are just in the top row. Click OK. Now watch this, just like that. We have price, and it highlights the whole column. Not the whole column, just down to the last bit of data. And finally, we have car type. Notice it put underscore because there's a space. Names aren't allowed to have spaces. All right, now let's count. I want to count how many sales we had. Equals count. Oh, there's a bunch of counts. Notice in 2007, these screen tips come up. They're so polite. Counts the number of cells in a range that have numbers. You can't see that. It's off the screen. There it is. If you select count, it counts the number of cells that are not empty. That's the one you use for words, but that will count numbers and words. And then there's count blanks, all sorts of things. But let's just use count because we want to count numbers. And then what's the name of our range? You know, I can't remember what I named it. I just named it a second ago. Oh, yeah, it's price. You can type out price like this. In the drop down in 2007, the dog tag means it's a name. The f of x means it's a function. So once you get to it, you could hit tab. Another way to do this is if you totally forget, you can't even remember the first letter, hit the F3 key. And that gives you a list of names, F3. And I'm going to say double-click price, and then hit enter. So there's 101. The median, that means which one's in the middle. So we want to find the actual median price. This is different than average, which adds them all up, divides by the count. Median just finds the one in the middle. Why do we have median? Example, real estate. You don't want a huge $5 million house dragging up the average. So median is a way to get around that. Median you use when you have really small or really big values. Notice What if I don't know what function to use? I click up here, and then I type median. And of course, there's a median function. So I'm going to get the median of, and I remember it this time, price. Notice as soon as you type a name, oh, that's so polite. It gives us a little preview over here. That's pretty useful for a bad typer like me, right? See, I think it's price, and I don't see anything there, so I know it's not it, and I backspace. I get rid of that extra C. Oh, and there it is. We got our 2 previews there also. Click OK. Now, sum if. Sum if. This means, and this is probably one of the most common tasks of people that use Excel, especially in business offices doing data analysis and stuff like that. Hey, the boss just wants to see the sales greater than 20,000. Or later, we'll want to just add up the sum if. We know how to alt equals a whole column, but how do you add just the ones that are Toyota? Let's try sum if. And I put my criteria over here in a cell because then it's easy to change. Now, what would you search for? Well, you'd search for sum conditionally, right? So say something like, or add conditionally. And it's got a few of them. dsum adds the numbers in a field or column of records in a database. That could work, but you'd have to look at help on how to do it. Sum, no, that just adds it. Sum if adds the cell specified by a given condition or criteria. That sounds like the one. Now, when you start using sum if and count if, and later in this class we'll see sum ifs and count ifs, it's important to read these. Once you get the hang of it, then you don't need to use this. You can just type it into the cell. But the range is the range of cells you want evaluated. And then criteria is the condition or criteria in the form of a number, expression, or text. It defines which cells will be added. And then finally, the sum range. Well, that one makes sense. They named that. That's the numbers you want to add. Now, the way it works, sum if. Notice the first 2 are bold, and the second one is not bold. The first 2 meaning are totally necessary, and later we'll see how to use all 3. But right now, are the things we want to add and the criteria are in the same range, which is this price column. So I'm going to type price and then tab. The criteria is right here. Now that's very important. The criteria, whatever it is, if it's in a different column, like later it'll be over here, then you have to use this second range. The first range is always the criteria, then the criteria, and then whatever range you want to sum. If the range and the sum range are the same, then you just need to list it once. Click OK. Whoa! So sum if, it added up all of them. Let's try count if. I'm just going to type this one out. You could go up and type something into the help line, count conditionally, equals count if. Notice it gives us a whole long list, right? Count if is right there, so I can double click it. And this one's easy because the range always has the things we're counting because we're only counting. So it's different than sum if. It only has 2 ranges. Whoops, I clicked the help, which is pretty helpful. So the range, since we're counting Toyotas, it's going to be here. Oh, but I can just hit my F3 key and double click my car type. Notice in blue it highlights the whole thing because that's what a name does. Comma, and the screen tip is saying, hey, but what's the criteria? Now notice something here. I can't. The criteria is in F4 and I can't get to it. Let's try our arrow keys, because remember, you can't enter formulas with arrow keys. I'm going to hit my arrow key once to the right. Notice the dancing ant. You can kind of see them behind there. There we have it. Hit enter. 29 Toyotas. Now, let's see how to use sum if with all 3 arguments. Equals sum if. Now, range and criteria always go together. That's the criteria stuff, and then there's a sum range. Well, for us, we know if criteria is Toyota, we can't ask it to look at this column. We have to look at this column. So the first argument is the range that goes with the criteria. So I'm going to do car type. F3, double click. Comma, and the criteria, same thing. Again, I can't get to the F5, so I'm going to use my arrow key. See why they designed it that way, right? Most people just get in trouble with it, but the arrow key is really helpful in that way. Comma, so now we've looked through the car type. We've actually put in our criteria. Now, comma. The sum range is this whole column. Now, technically for this function sum if, You don't got to remember this. You can just click in the first one and it will work because the number of items to be summed is determined by the first argument. If I close parentheses and Control Enter, it gets it right. It sums up all the Toyota. But let me hit F2. I'm going to put the whole range in there, even though, because it makes it easier to remember how to do this. F3 and price. Control Enter. Now, the final thing we'll look at on this sheet tab is how to count two things. Well, we saw how to use count if for one criteria. How do you do two? Well, since we're counting, we'll just see how this has the Toyota right there? Well, what if we just put a plus sign here and then another count if? That's how you do it. Equals count if. And the range is going to be our car type. Notice I typed it out, and now I'm going to hit. I see that it's bold, so now I'm going to hit Tab, comma, and the criteria range is the one to my left. Close parentheses, plus, and then count if. Again, I'm going to try that car trick, right? Tab, comma, and now I have to go 2 cells to my left. Now, that's a little bit confusing. If you'd look beforehand, you could actually type it in. Or you could actually, if you really can't see it and you're not sure, and this is the way I do it a lot because it's bad typer, I click there and then down arrow, and then I can see the cursors there. All right, close parentheses. All that did is I have one count if that'll count how many Fords there are, and the other one will count how many Chevys. 72. So that's how to use names to be make it a little bit easier to create formulas. Now, cell reference, the hard topic for a lot of people. Let's look at the 4 types of cell reference. The first one we know is relative cell reference. I'm going to use my keyboard shortcut for AutoSum, Alt equals. Notice it says A4 to B4. There's no dollar signs in front of the A or the 4. That means please always add 1, 2 cells to my left. Now, that is not A4 to B4. It's 2 cells to my left, and I'll prove it to you. Control Enter. And now I want you to double click and send this down. That's another way to copy, as long as there's something to the left. Click in the last cell and hit F2. It doesn't say A4 to B4. It says 1 cell to my left all the way to 2 cells to my left. The 2 cells to my left. That is a relative cell reference. Very helpful when we're doing sum. Let's do the next one. We're going to talk about locking a cell reference. Now, here it is. This is an income statement. Joe's Auto income statement for the year ended, and there's 2 years. And what we want to do is we want to compare. This is a common-sized income statement. We want to compare each one of the elements to total revenue. So here's how you do it. You do division equals this cell reference right here divided by this one. Now notice it's the blue one is 2 cells to my left divided by B17. Then I'm going to hit Enter. Equals 2 cells to my left divided by B17. Equals 2 cells to my left divided by B17. Are you getting tired of typing B17? Every one of these formulas, Shift Enter F2. See how it has B17? Shift Enter F2. See how it has B17? Instead of typing them all in, I'm simply going to delete them and lock one of them. There's a way to tell a cell reference to stay the same as you copy it down. I'm going to click here, divided by 2 cells to my left, divided by B17. Hit your F4 key. The F4 key, when your cursor is next to a cell reference, is a toggle. So it kind of looks like a merry-go-round. It's going toggling, merry-go-rounding through the cell references. The one we want, since we're copying this formula down and we want it locked, is $sign in front of the row reference. Here's how you remember. The formula is being copied down, and when you copy down, you're going across what? You're copying it across the numbers. So if you want it locked, you got to put it in front of the number. Not only that, but in just a moment, we're going to copy it this direction, and that cell reference right there is 1, 2 cells to my left. So when I copy it over here, that blue one's going to move right there. Whereas this one is not locked in front of the column, so when we move it across the columns, this green one's going to move there. Control Enter. I'm going to double click and send it down. Notice it wrecked the formatting, so I'm going to point to the Smart tag and say fill without formatting. You can't really see that. fill without formatting, and it doesn't wreck the formatting. Now I'm going to click in the last cell and hit F2. It's very important. You see how that worked perfectly? It stayed B17 all the way down. B24, 2 cells to my left, divided by locked B17. Now watch this. It gets even better. I'm going to click in this cell and drag. Actually, I'm going to highlight the whole column. The whole column there. And click. I'm going to copy all these formulas over like this. Zip. And now let's go start at the top and hit F2. Notice how the blue one is still 2 cells to my left, 1, 2. But this one, because there was not a dollar sign in front of that B over there, it moved to C. So it properly moved to this income statement column, which we need for this whole column of percentages. We need that base. So it locked. Come down here, and you can see that it worked perfectly. That's an example of how to lock the formula going down across the rows but not across the columns. Relative and mixed cell reference with the row reference locked. Now we're going to go down and look at a next example. Here's an example of what you would do for locking the column reference but not the row reference. Here's our sales projected. We have our year. There's our numbers for January. We want a formula here that we can copy over and down, and it will give us an exactly, for 2003, 1.5% or a 0.015 increase each month. But when we go down a row, we want for 2004, we want it to be 2.3% or 0.023. Here's how we do it. Equals 1 cell to my left, because here in February we need to look there and increase it, whereas when we get from April we need to be looking at March and increase it. Same when we go down. Times, and I'm going to click on this cell reference right here. Now, let's ask some questions, because this is a good way to approach learning cell references. This green one right here is the 1.015. When I move to March and to April, do I still need to use that? Yes, I do. So I need since I'm going to copy this formula boop, boop, across the columns, I need it locked in front of the column reference. So I'll hit my F4 key 1, 2, 3 times. Now, let's think about this. This $C36, it's going to work that way, locked. But what if I copy it down? Do I still want it locked on this one? No, I don't. When I copy down to the next row, I want it to move down to the next year's rate of change, the 1 plus the rate of change. So that formula will work fine. We've asked 2 questions about this cell reference. What do we want it to do in each direction? We've answered it. Control Enter. And then drag over and double click and send it down. Now I'm going to click in this one right here and hit F2 to check. And sure enough, it got it right. Cell references. That's relative cell reference, and this is a mixed cell reference with the column lock but not the row. Now let's look at our final example here. We have a huge out to December. I'm going to highlight all of these cells right here. And we saw this before with Control Enter. When you highlight a whole range of cells, the active cell, if you put something into it and hit Control Enter, it'll populate all the cells. So I'm going to blow this back up. And here we have, again, a unit sale projections given a rate of change. And here's all of our years. Here's our beginning amounts. So for February, March, April, we want to increase whatever the month before was by 1.5% or 0.015. However, when we go down to for all the successive years, our assumption is, oh, it's always going to increase by 0.015. So guess what? We're going to need to lock it in both directions. Let's start our formula. Equals whatever cell is to my left. And notice when I go over to March and April, I still want it always looking direct, a relative cell reference, one to my left. And when I go down, so when I get down to March in 2014, I need it looking 1 cell to my left, which is February for 2014. So that cell reference is fine. Times, and then I'm going to click here. I want this locked when I go across the columns and when I go across the rows. Every one of these cells needs B52. So F4, and that's the cell reference to lock it in all directions. Hey, by the way, how many directions are there? 1, 2. Left and right, up and down, across the rows, across the columns. Control Enter will populate all those cells. Now, if you don't believe it, just scroll over to the last one, click in it, and hit F2. And sure enough, it got one cell to my left, and it's still looking at B52. Now, let's go over to assumption tables. Assumption tables are very important, and they are linked to cell references. So we want to calculate projected net income. Now I'm going to make this a little bit smaller just so we can see the whole thing. Assumption tables. Assumption tables are where you put the data that will vary. So when you create formulas, you base your formulas on some formula input area. That way, guess what? This is a projected net income. This is a budget. So all of these numbers could change. If you're in the middle of a meeting and your boss says, hey, what about if we change expense 2 to 20? You can just click here, change it to 20, and everything will update. Now, assumption tables. If you want to minimize formula creation, which means create your table of formulas, this will be our table filled with formulas, with the least amount of effort, the way your assumption table is set up is important. Now, here's how it works. See the labels here? They are listed vertically. If that's the case, then you want to list those input numbers, input for formulas, vertically also. So I always think of it, the labels are vertical in the formula table. Assumption table also has vertical. By the way, it could work the other way too. If we had all the expenses listed horizontally, then this one would have to be listed horizontally. Why is that important? Because you can't use mixed cell references. I'm going to show you how to create that many formulas, a bunch of them, all with using Control Enter, right? And if you don't have your assumption table set up in the same orientation as your formula table, then you can't use this trick. All right, here we go. Here's our, I'll blow this up a little bit. I've color-coded this because this gets a certain formula, these one gets a certain formula, these all get the same formula, etc. Now, let's get our start number for January equals, and in our assumption table it says start. And it's important, I'm going to hit Tab. It's important to also label everything smartly so when you come back next week, you know what it is. Sales rate of change. Now, here we go. Equals one cell to my left times, actually, I'm going to hit Escape. I'm going to highlight all of these since they all get the same formula. I'm going to use our Control Enter trick where we populate the cells with the formula. And right here, I'm going to type equals one cell to my left times, in parentheses, 1 plus, and I'm going to click on my rate of change. This is not like we saw in the last one. This is just the rate. Just a moment ago, we saw 1 plus the rate. Now, that formula right there, boy, that's hard to see in the green. That's B20. We want the, it's better if you look up here. The B20, we want it locked with our cell reference going across the column, right? Because this formula is going to be copied this way across the column, so we want it locked there. Close parentheses, and now populate all 3 cells, Control Enter. Click in the last one and hit F2. Sure enough, that worked just fine. Now, the insides of the table, those are the sales projections, right? The inside, we're going to base all of these expenses on whatever the monthly revenue is. This is a very common way of estimating expenses. Here's all our percentages as a percent of our sales. Notice they're all vertical. Now, let's highlight the whole range, and the active cell is the light-colored cell. I'm going to type equals, and then I'm going to click on the revenue for this month. Now, think about this. When we copy down this column, we need to be looking at that 50,000, but when we move this way, we want it to move to there. So how do I lock it going down across the rows? I hit F4 twice, $ in front of the number. But notice no $ in front of the column reference, so when we move this formula this way, it'll be looking at this 50,375. Now we want to multiply, and now expense 1 through 7 is in the same orientation, so we simply click on the first one, and we ask the question, when I copy this down, do I want it locked? Or is that B21 right there? When I copy the formula down to there, expense 2, do I want the percentage estimate down here to jump down to 15? You bet. So not locked across the rows. Now, what about when I move over to the next month column? Do I want the cell reference to move over here? No. So I need to lock it across the column. So I hit F4, F4, F4. Now, that's the formula. As simple as that. You have highlighted everything. So to populate all the cells, hold Control and tap Enter. Click in the last cell and hit F2 to check it. That is like magic. Still to this day, it just seems like magic. All right, the last thing are total expenses. I'm going to highlight these. And notice I've highlighted all of them. There's the active cell. I'm going to Alt equals. Oh, it did it for me. Oh, but be careful. Hit F2. Alt equals is the keyboard shortcut for AutoSum. And Excel was trying to be polite. And it wasn't because it highlighted all these numbers. We can't have total expense include our sales, or we're going to have a massive loss that's not really a loss. So watch this. One way to edit a range of cells is to point to the edge of the blue box and click and drag down. Now, because we've edited this formula in the active cell and all the cells are highlighted, I can simply Control and Enter to repopulate those cells. I'm a little bit nervous here, so I'm going to click here and hit F2, and sure enough, it got it right. Now, finally, we want net income. And so we're going to highlight all of these cells right here. And in this active cell, notice Excel 2007 does not do a good job. The active cell is darker here, but there it is. Equals, and I'm going to click on this cell right here. Oh, that's the sales minus our total expenses right there. When I Control Enter, I get exactly what I want, including the 0, which is not what I want. That's a mistake. Oh, no, that'll work just fine because when we total this column and put a label there, that'll be the total sales, and that'll be the total expenses. I'm going to put total right here. I'm going to come down here, and this time if you wanted to have an alternative method for sum, you would type equals SUM, and then simply then highlight this range. That is the range 1, 2, 3, 4 cells to my left. Close parentheses and Control Enter. I'm going to double click here to see if I got it right, and sure enough, I did. And we could check this number right here. Notice we went this minus this. You could check this right here by going Alt equals, and then I'm going to highlight this range right here. All of the individual month net income better equal our total right there, and it does. One last assumption table example. Here we have unit sales, cost of goods, fixed cost, and net income, and a bunch of assumptions. We have sell price of a boomerang, 25 bucks. Units sold, 15,250. So from that, we can calculate our revenue, right? This, the price times all the units sold. Manufacturing cost of boomerang as a percent of sales price. We're going to have to create a formula that will calculate from our sell price what our cost is. Oh, well, all this means this is a percent of sell price. So if we multiply 0.555 times our price, that'll give us the cost, the variable cost. Then we have our fixed cost. That's for a business, the costs that don't change, like your mortgage payment and depreciation and other expenses for fixed equipment that's going to last for the whole year. So our fixed cost, that is very much different than our variable cost, which we'll calculate. Even if we sell none, we still have to pay for pay all the fixed costs. And then we'll talk about these numbers in just a moment. Oh, that moment is now. Here's our table. We're going to calculate a bunch of varying sales, cost of goods sold, that's our variable cost, fixed cost, and net income at varying unit levels. See, for us, we've estimated that we're going to sell 15,250. But really, if you're planning for the future, you need to not just pick one number, but a range of numbers. So watch this. Here's all of our variable data in our assumption table. For units, we're going to start at 2,500 and add increments of 2,500. So I'm going to type equals start number. Notice how carefully I've labeled these assumptions. Click there, and then I'm going to hit Enter. And this formula, since I want to add 2,500, I'm going to say equals one cell above plus probably easier to see up here, one cell above plus my increment. That means amount I add each time. And that D46 right there, I'm going to lock it going down. So I'm going to hit the F4 key twice. That's in front of the row reference. Control Enter. Why Control Enter? Because I'm immediately going to do something to the cell, which is copy it. That's my little fill handle in the corner there. That little crosshair or angry rabbit, you click and drag down. Now, how do we calculate sales from our varying units? Hey, that's easy. Equals one cell to my left. I'm actually going to remove this. I tried to be polite and have different colors for different columns, which had different formulas, but it's hard to see in the video. Equals for sales. Well, now I have to change this back to black. See how nice it is to have those there on your quack, as we saw in the first video? All right, equals sales units sold times our cell price right there. And I'm going to hit the F4 key twice to lock it in front of the row because we're copying it down across the rows. Control Enter. And now I can double click with my angry rabbit and send it down. Cost of goods sold. Hey, that's going to be, since we know the total sales, we simply say one cell to my left times this particular cost of boomerangs as a percent of sales price. Now we need to lock this going down, so I hit F4, F4. Dollar sign in front of the number. Control Enter, double click and send it down. Fixed cost. Oh, that's the same number all the way down, so I click on this. F4 twice because I'm going down across the rows. You know, people always ask, why am I so insistent about using just the minimum number of dollar signs? The reason why is because when you're learning how, if you get lazy and do this all the time, when you then get to a situation where you have to use mixed cell references, you're not used to doing it. So that's why I always do that. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. Same number all the way through. Now, net income, that is equals, our sales. And since we have two expenses, we have to use minus and then sum these two right here. Those are all relative cell references. Control Enter. And double click and send it down. Oh, notice it's very important that we did this analysis like this with all these units because we're still barely in, we're somewhere in between these two right here. So we're somewhere between loss and a little bit of gain. But the nice thing about this assumption table is what? Especially this column right here. Let's change the beginning number to 5,000. Enter. See how the whole thing changes? Then I'm going to change this to 5,000. The whole thing changes. So now we have a much higher range from 5,000 up to 45,000. Now let's say we needed to change our price, so we're going to raise it to 35. And sure enough, everything changes. Assumption tables. Absolutely important. Numbers that vary go into assumption table. Why? Because then it's easy to change. Set up your orientation the same. Notice, though, this one up here, the orientation really did matter. But this one, it kind of didn't matter that much because they were all different. Each column had a different calculation. Numbers that vary in assumption table. Orientation, if that's possible, set it up the same. All right, we will see you. We have a couple more videos in the basics before we go on to the rest of this class. See you next video.